One of the coolest yet easily overlooked details in Resident Evil Requiem is that it's actually Resident Evil 9, but Capcom chose to hide that number in a really clever way instead of showing it directly. At first glance, most players don't even realize it because the title just looks like a normal word. But if you take a closer look at the logo, especially the letter Q, you'll notice something interesting. The Q is designed in a way that subtly resembles the number 9, blending perfectly into the word without making it obvious. It's a small visual trick, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. And honestly, it doesn't affect gameplay at all, which makes it even more useless, but also kind of genius at the same time. Another really cool, but completely unnecessary detail in Resident Evil Requiem is that both main protagonists are wearing real-life Hamilton watches. Now that alone is already a nice touch, but what makes it even more interesting is that the time shown on these watches is perfectly synchronized with the actual in-game story timeline. This means that as the story progresses, the watch hands move in real time, matching exactly what's happening in the narrative. Most players will never even notice it during normal gameplay because the watch is not shown clearly enough most of the time. In fact, you usually need something like a PC free cam mod just to properly zoom in and check the current time on the watch. You can actually use these watches to track how much time passes during the events of the game, almost like an in-game clock hidden in plain sight. This exact detail can even help you break down the full timeline of Resident Evil Requiem, which is something I've already explained in my previous video. A funny but pretty useless detail is that the merchant from Resident Evil 4 doesn't appear in Resident Evil Requiem at all. If you were expecting to hear his iconic voice or buy something mid-game, that never actually happens. What makes this even better is that Capcom joked about it, saying he might be buried in massive debt because of Leon. And honestly, if you remember how much Leon buys and upgrades, it kind of makes sense, but this isn't really part of the actual story or lore. It's more of a meta joke, something meant for fans who are familiar with Resident Evil 4 and its characters. During Grace's section in Resident Evil Requiem, when it's raining, there's a hidden detail you can only notice using free cam. If you try to go inside a certain shop, you'll find an empty room filled with paintings on the walls. What's strange is that players are never meant to see this area during normal gameplay. Capcom's reason for placing it there isn't clear, and it doesn't serve any purpose in the story or objectives. It's one of those hidden corners that exists purely as a leftover or an unused space, and discovering it feels like uncovering a tiny secret that most players will never notice. Certain doors in Resident Evil Requiem can close automatically after you pass through them. Capcom uses this mechanic not only to separate different sections of the game, but also to add an extra layer of tension and fear. When a door closes behind you, it creates a feeling of confinement and isolation, making the area feel more dangerous and heightening the player's sense of vulnerability. It's a small environmental detail, but it effectively contributes to the game's atmosphere and keeps players on edge as they explore. Some drawers and containers in Resident Evil Requiem can be opened even when there's nothing inside them. The game includes these empty containers to keep players guessing and prevent loot from feeling predictable. By adding this small layer of uncertainty, players can't assume that every drawer will contain something useful. It subtly encourages exploration and makes the environment feel less mechanical, even though it doesn't directly affect the story or gameplay. The book Emily's reading is Village of Shadows, and that's actually the same book Mia reads to Rosemary in Resident Evil Village. Grace's footsteps are just slightly quieter than Leon's. Even when they're both walking at the exact same speed, it's a tiny detail, something most players would never notice, but once you do, it subtly changes how each character feels. Leon sounds heavier, more grounded, while Grace moves just a little more softly, almost like she's trying not to be heard. Leon finishes his entire story in about 24 hours, and which is kind of crazy when you really think about it. From the moment he shows up, everything just keeps happening back to back. There's barely any break in between. It's just one long, continuous day where everything unfolds. Grace, on the other hand, is completely different. Her story takes around 15 days, so it naturally feels slower. You're not rushing from one moment to the next. Instead, things take time to build. Grace as a character is intentionally portrayed as weaker and more vulnerable compared to the typical Resident Evil protagonist. Unlike a trained fighter like Leon, she doesn't have the same combat skills or confidence in dangerous situations. This makes her section slower and more tense, requiring players to carefully plan their movements and approach encounters with caution. Her human vulnerability adds a layer of realism and heightens the suspense throughout her story segments. Here's a really weird little fact about this game. The developers actually wanted it to be a multiplayer open world experience at first, They even started working on that idea, planning out how it would all come together, but eventually, they scrapped the whole thing. They went back to the drawing board and restarted the project from scratch, focusing on the core Resident Evil experience we know today. Resident Evil Requiem is actually the first mainline Resident Evil game to include Latin American Spanish voice acting. It's a detail that might go unnoticed for most players, but it's a nice touch for fans who speak that language. Leon's car has the license plate 9642. It's actually a clever nod to the mainline games he's appeared in. The numbers reference RE9, RE6, RE4, and RE2, basically a subtle Easter egg for longtime fans. It's one of those tiny touches that you might completely miss if you're not paying attention. But once you notice it, it's pretty satisfying. Speaking of Leon's car, here's a funny little detail. No matter what you do, you actually can't damage it. Shoot it, crash it, try anything, the game just won't let you. It's like the developers wanted to make sure Leon's beautiful car stayed perfect no matter what happens. And here's another fun little detail about Leon's car. The interior is surprisingly detailed. If you use free cam, you can really take a close look. You'll notice the logo, the dashboard, and all the small touches the developers added. The game didn't originally come with a photo mode. Capcom actually added it later in a patch because fans wanted a way to take artsy screenshots of characters and the environments. It's a small feature, but it makes the game more fun for people who like to pause, explore, and capture moments exactly the way they want. The developers list the minimum RAM requirement for the game as 16 gigabytes. But here's the interesting part. Many PC players have reported running it smoothly with just 8 gigabytes of RAM. It's a tiny detail, maybe useless if you're on console, but for PC players, it really shows how well optimized the game is. It's impressive that the game can perform so well even on systems that don't meet the official minimum requirements. Have you ever noticed how realistic the hair in this game looks? The way it moves, it almost feels alive. Well, it turns out the developers actually hired a professional wig artist. They studied how real wigs move and behave, and used that knowledge to design the hair in the game. It's a small detail that most players might not think about, but it really shows the level of care and effort that went into making the characters feel lifelike. Switching characters doesn't reset the world. Instead, the game treats both characters as if they exist simultaneously in the same timeline, meaning any changes made by one character remain in place for the other, creating a shared, persistent world that feels continuous and interconnected. Character blinking isn't random. It's carefully designed to follow natural, human-like timing patterns, with subtle variations in frequency and pauses that mimic real eye behavior, making characters feel more lifelike and believable without players even consciously noticing it. Grace may come across as far less prepared than Leon, but despite her inexperience and lack of backup, she still manages to navigate dangerous areas on her own, relying more on instinct, caution, and quick decision-making rather than the confidence and training that Leon clearly has. Leon and Grace explore some of the same locations at different times, yet their paths never cross during the early stages of the game, creating a sense of parallel storytelling where each character experiences the environment and its dangers independently, adding depth and tension to the narrative. At first, when Grace uses a gun in combat, her hands visibly shake, reflecting her inexperience and nervousness. But as the story progresses, she gradually gains confidence and control, eventually handling the weapon steadily without any trembling. If you play the game in third person, you get to experience a richer set of animations compared to first person. For example, during the first encounter with the girl, you can see Grace stumble and rush toward the room with the light, a sequence that feels both terrifying and fluid, making the moment much more intense and visually engaging. In Grace's section, players can find a lighter engraved with Care Center and the year 1966, likely a subtle nod to the reopening of the Care Center in that year, serving as a small piece of environmental storytelling that adds depth and history to the location.